They say the lantern guides the lost, but here...
The vault door weighs 4,000 pounds and cost me $68,000. And the morning the world ended, I couldn't remember the combination. My name is Graham Kincaid, 53 years old. I made my money in commercial real estate in the Research Triangles, strip malls, medical office parks, mixed-use developments anchored by regional grocery chains. Not glamorous work, transactional work. I could read a lease agreement the way a cardiologist reads an EKG, find the irregular rhythm, and know exactly where the money would bleed. I was good at it. Good enough to accumulate the kind of wealth that makes a person believe preparation is the same as competence. I built the vault over 18 months on 40 acres of wooded land I'd purchased in Chatham County, North Carolina, 30 miles southwest of my home in Chapel Hill. The parcel was unremarkable. Gently rolling Piedmont clay soil, loblolly pine, a seasonal creek. The vault was remarkable. 2,200 square feet of reinforced underground living space. 2 bedrooms, a medical bay, a communications room, a kitchen with a commercial water filtration system, a diesel generator with a 1,000-gallon buried tank, and an armory I'd stocked with the nervous enthusiasm of a man spending money against an anxiety he couldn't name. The contractor was a firm out of Utah that specialized in high-net-worth survivalist construction. They flew a crew east for 7 months and billed me with the cheerful regularity of people who understood that my fear was their revenue model. I'd invited 8 people. That was the design capacity. 10 total, including me. 8 people I'd chosen with the same methodology I applied to tenant selection. Financial reliability, useful skill sets, low drama. My business partner Warren Taft, who'd contributed $400,000 to the build, and whose surgical background made him the group's designated medical authority. Warren's wife Diana, a former pharmaceutical sales rep who knew drug interactions the way I knew zoning codes. My property manager Renata Souza, who could troubleshoot mechanical systems and spoke 3 languages. Her teenage son, Marco, who was 16 and quiet, and whom Renata refused to leave behind, which I understood. My college friend, Dominic Pruitt, who'd spent 20 years as a long-haul trucker and knew engines and logistics. And 2 others, a married couple, the Lynns, Kenneth and May, both software engineers, both meticulous, both the kind of people who backed up their backup drives. That was the list. 8 people, vetted, briefed, each assigned a bunk and a roll and a 3-ring binder I'd had printed with vault protocols. I'd spent 400 hours on those binders. Shift schedules, resource rationing tables, communication procedures, conflict resolution guidelines, a chain of command with my name at the top, printed in bold. The morning the news broke. The real news, not the early speculation, but the confirmed footage out of Philadelphia. The highway aerial shots, the sound of a governor's voice cracking on live broadcast. I drove to the vault, alone, ahead of the others, because I wanted to be there first. Wanted to open the door and stand inside and feel the $68,000 certainty of steel between me and everything falling apart outside. I stood at the keypad, and my mind went white. The combination was 6 digits. I'd chosen it myself. I'd typed it into the keypad 14 times during testing. And now, with the truck radio still playing evacuation orders for Durham County, my fingers wouldn't move. Renata's Honda pulled up behind my truck. She got out with Marco, both carrying duffel bags, both moving fast. She looked at me, standing at the vault door with my hand frozen over the keypad, and she didn't ask what was wrong. She pulled a laminated card from her wallet, the emergency access code I distributed to the inner circle. Typed in the 6 digits, and the lock disengaged with a hydraulic sigh. "You gave me this for a reason," she said. I nodded. She went inside. Marco followed. I stood in the October sunlight and listened to the sound of tires on the gravel road, more vehicles approaching and something farther away. A sound I couldn't identify yet, rhythmic and wrong, rising from the direction of Pittsburgh. I went inside. Renata was already running the generator startup sequence. Marco was stacking duffel bags in the staging area. I was the owner. I was the planner. I was the man who'd written his name in bold at the top of a chain of command. And I'd frozen at my own door. Warren and Diana arrived 20 minutes later in Warren's black Audi, which was the wrong vehicle for a gravel road and which he'd driven anyway, because Warren made decisions based on identity rather than function. He was 57, silver-haired, carrying a leather medical bag that probably contained more bourbon than bandages. And he walked through the vault door with the ease of someone entering a hotel he'd booked online. "Generators running?" he asked, not greeting anyone. "Renata started it," I said. "Good. Diana needs the bathroom. We've been driving for 2 hours." Diana moved past me with a tight smile. She was a controlled woman, the kind who maintained composure as a social practice. Her hands were shaking. Dominic arrived next, alone, in a cargo van loaded with supplementary supplies I hadn't asked him to bring. Cases of canned protein, 5-gallon water jugs, extra batteries. He'd anticipated needs beyond my binder, and I felt a flash of something that wasn't quite gratitude and wasn't quite resentment. Dominic was 51, barrel-chested, with a face that suggested he'd been in more truck stop arguments than he'd admit. He started unloading without being directed. The Lynns didn't come. I tried Kenneth's phone, straight to voicemail. Tried May's, same. I sent texts to both. The messages went through, but the read receipts never appeared. "They're in Raleigh," Renata said, reading my face. "The highways out of Raleigh are parking lots. I listened to the traffic reports the whole drive. They might still make it." "Graham, the traffic report stopped broadcasting 20 minutes ago." I closed the vault door. The 4,000-pound steel slab swung on its hydraulic hinges and sealed with a sound that was supposed to make me feel safe. Instead, it sounded like a period at the end of a sentence I wasn't finished writing. Kenneth and May were outside that sentence now. Their bunks were made, their binders stacked, their names on the shift schedule. They were in Raleigh, and Raleigh was no longer answering its radio. That was our first loss, and we hadn't even started. The vault functioned exactly as designed. I'll give myself that. The air recycling system hummed at the correct decibel level. The water filtration produced clean output from the well I'd drilled 6 months prior. The LED lighting panels cast a daylight spectrum glow across the concrete surfaces. The diesel generator ran smoothly, feeding the electrical panel with a steady pulse of purchased continuity. Every system I'd specified, every redundancy I'd built, every dollar I'd converted into infrastructure was performing precisely as the Utah contractor had promised. 7 people in a space designed for 10, surplus capacity. This should have been comfortable. It was not comfortable. By the second hour, Warren had established himself in the medical bay and closed the door. Diana sat at the communication station, scanning frequencies on the shortwave radio I'd installed but never learned to operate. Dominic organized the supply room, rearranging my pre-staged inventory to accommodate what he'd brought, muttering about my canned goods selection with the authority of a man who'd eaten in 1,000 roadside diners. Renata ran a systems check on every mechanical component in the vault, tapping gauges and reading dials with a competence that should have reassured me. Marco sat on his bunk with his headphones on and his eyes closed. And I envied him. I stood in the main room, the common area I'd designed as the social hub of the vault. with a table and chairs and a whiteboard where I'd imagined running daily briefings. And I held my 3-ring binder and felt the weight of it. Not the physical weight, the presumptive weight. The weight of having written a chain of command that assumed the person at the top would be the one people naturally followed. Diana's voice from the communications room, flat and factual. I'm picking up military traffic. Something about a perimeter failure at Camp Lejeune. They're saying the base is being overrun. Camp Lejeune is 3 hours from here, Dominic said from the supply room. It was 3 hours from here, Renata said, not looking up from her gauge. We don't know what travel looks like anymore. Through the vault's surface microphone, a small audio feed from a concealed exterior mic I'd installed for perimeter awareness. We heard the sound again, the one I'd caught while standing at the door. Closer now, layered, a shuffling percussion against the gravel drive. Not one set of feet. Many. Marco took off his headphones. Everyone stopped. The sound grew and then receded, like a tide passing over the surface above us. And nobody breathed until it was gone. The binder's chain of command lasted 18 hours. I called the first group meeting at the common room table at 6 a.m., the morning after we'd sealed the door. I'd prepared an agenda: resource inventory, shift assignments, communication protocols, a rationing schedule based on a 90-day scenario. I'd printed copies. I'd placed them at each seat. Warren arrived last, carrying a coffee mug that smelled like the bourbon I'd suspected was in his medical bag. He sat at the far end of the table and didn't pick up the agenda. Before we start, he said, I want to discuss the medical supplies. That's item 3 on the agenda. I'm making it item 1. The medical bay is stocked with first aid basics: antibiotics, analgesics, sutures, antiseptic. Adequate for minor injuries. Inadequate for anything involving surgery, anesthesia, or long-term pharmaceutical management. Diana takes daily medication for a thyroid condition. The supply you've stocked covers 45 days. The scenario is 90 days. I built to 90. You built to 90 for calories and water. You built to 45 for Diana's levothyroxine, which means either you didn't know she needed it, or you knew and didn't plan for it. I planned based on the health questionnaires everyone submitted. Diana's questionnaire listed the medication. I watched her fill it out. The table was silent. I pulled my copy of the health questionnaires from the binder. Diana's form listed levothyroxine, 100 micrograms daily. I'd read this form. I'd flagged it. The pharmaceutical supply list in my procurement spreadsheet showed a 45-day supply, which I'd approved because the Utah contractor's medical consultant had recommended it as standard. I'd followed the consultant's guidance instead of the actual data in front of me. I made an error, I said. You made an error on a $2.4 million build, and it's my wife's health. Warren's voice hadn't risen. That was worse than shouting. Warren had spent 30 years delivering bad news in surgical contexts, and he'd learned that volume was less effective than precision. He was cutting me open in front of the group, and every word landed where he aimed it. I can address the shortfall, I said. There may be pharmacies accessible within a... Within a what? A driving radius? We sealed the door. Your binder says the door stays sealed for 90 days. Your binder says no surface excursions without group consensus. Are you proposing we open the vault on day 2 because you miscounted pills? Renata intervened. Not on my behalf, on the group's. Warren, the error is real. The solution doesn't have to be immediate. We have 45 days to figure out resupply or substitution. That's time. Can we use it? Warren looked at Renata, then at Diana. Diana's face was composed, her hands folded on the table. She'd known about the shortfall, I realized. She'd checked her supply the moment they arrived, counted the bottles, done the math. She'd told Warren, and Warren had waited until the first meeting to make it public because Warren understood leverage. "We can use it," Diana said. "But I want the medical bay inventory transferred to Warren's sole authority, not the binder's protocols, Warren's judgment." "That's not how the chain," I started. "Graham." Dominic, from the opposite end of the table, his big hands flat on the printed agenda. "Nobody here is going to follow a chain of command written by one person in peacetime. That's not how people work. You built a good vault. Let's not pretend building a vault makes you a general." The room shifted. Not against me, or not only against me, toward a recalibration that had been inevitable since the moment Renata typed in the code. I'd forgotten. I was the owner, the funder, the man whose anxiety had produced 2,200 square feet of underground survival. But anxiety is not leadership, and money is not authority. And the binder in my hands was a document written by a man who'd confused purchasing a shelter with earning the right to govern it. I moved the medical bay to Warren's authority. We finished the agenda. The shift schedule was adopted with modifications Renata proposed, and I accepted. Dominic took over supply management. I retained responsibility for generator maintenance and infrastructure, because those were the systems I'd bought and could still credibly oversee. When the meeting ended, Marco, who hadn't spoken, looked at me from his bunk with an expression that contained something I wasn't expecting. Sympathy. On day 4, someone knocked on the vault door from the outside. The sound came through the surface microphone at 2:17 a.m. Not the shuffling percussion of infected feet, not the ambient noise of wildlife. A deliberate, rhythmic knock. 3 hits, pause, 3 hits, pause. The pattern of a person who expected to be recognized. I was on the overnight monitoring shift, sitting at the communications station with Diana's frequency scanner cycling through bands of static. The knock brought me upright. I toggled the exterior microphone to full gain. A voice, male, exhausted, audible through the mic's compression. "Warren, it's Gil. Open the door." I found Warren in the medical bay, asleep on the examination table he'd claimed as his bed. I shook his shoulder. "There's someone at the surface. He's asking for you by name. He says his name is Gil." Warren's eyes opened, and his face did something I'd never seen in 20 years of knowing him. It collapsed, not into fear, into a kind of recognition that contained its own verdict. He sat up, put on his shoes, and walked to the communications station without speaking. He pressed the transmit button on the surface mic. "Gil, how many are with you?" "3. Me, Carmen, Lily. Warren, please." "Lily's 12. Warren released the button, looked at me. Gil Moda. He was my anesthesiologist for 15 years. His wife is Carmen. Lily is their daughter. "How does he know about the vault?" "Because I told him about it. I told him during the build. I told him the location, the specs, the capacity. You told him about my vault." "I told him about the vault I put $400,000 into." "Yes." The distinction landed. This wasn't my vault. It had never been only my vault. Warren had bought equity, and equity came with the right to disclose. I hadn't written a confidentiality clause because it hadn't occurred to me that my business partner would share our survival plan with someone outside the approved list. "There are 3 people outside, Graham. One of them is 12. The vault is at 7 occupants. Capacity is 10. Then we have room. That's not the point. The point is vetting, briefing, supply calculation. The point is, there's a 12-year-old girl standing on top of our bunker in the dark." Renata appeared in the corridor, awake, drawn by voices. "What's happening?" Warren's colleague is at the surface with his family, I said. Warren told him about the vault without authorization. Without your authorization, Warren corrected. I didn't need authorization to tell a friend where to find safety. I needed a conscience. Renata looked at the surface monitor. The audio was still live. I could hear breathing, a child's cough, the sound of someone shifting weight on gravel. How do we verify they're not infected? Visual inspection through the surface camera, Warren said. The entrance corridor has a 20-foot transition zone with a secondary door. We open the outer door, bring them into the corridor, examine them through the camera before opening the inner door. Graham designed it himself. It's in the binder. He was right. I had designed it. A decontamination and screening corridor, precisely for this scenario. I described it in the binder as controlled ingress protocol. I'd never imagined using it for a 12-year-old girl I hadn't vetted. Open the outer door, I said. Dominic operated the outer door mechanism from the control panel. On the surface camera, a low-resolution infrared feed that rendered everything in gray-green ghost tones. 3 figures moved into the entrance corridor. A tall man carrying a backpack and supporting a smaller woman whose gait suggested injury. Between them, holding the woman's hand, a child. Warren examined them through the camera's zoom. Gil's ambulatory. Carmen's favoring her left leg. Could be a sprain or a fracture. No visible wounds on exposed skin. Lily appears uninjured. Open the inner door, I said. They came through. Gil Mota was 48, lean, with the dark circles and hollow expression of someone who'd been moving for days without adequate rest. Carmen was smaller, leaning on Gil, her left ankle wrapped in a compression bandage improvised from a torn shirt. Lily stood between her parents and looked at the vault's interior with the wide, cataloging eyes of a child absorbing a new environment at a speed adults can't match. Thank you, Gil said, looking at Warren. Then at me. You must be Graham. Warren told me about you. I wanted to ask what, specifically, Warren had told him about me. Instead, I said, welcome. We'll brief you on protocols in the morning. Renata took Carmen to the medical bay. Warren followed. Dominic found blankets. Marco gave Lily his headphones without being asked, a gesture that cost him his only private comfort, and that he performed without hesitation. I stood in the common room and recounted. 10. The vault was at capacity. The number I'd designed for, the number in my spreadsheet, the number the Utah contractor had certified, the number that represented the upper boundary of sustainable habitation. We'd reached it on day 4 of 90, and I hadn't chosen a single one of the 3 people who'd filled it. Carmen's ankle was fractured. Warren confirmed it the next morning with a physical examination and the portable X-ray unit I'd installed at considerable expense, and which Warren used for the first time with a confidence that suggested he'd been waiting for a patient worthy of the equipment. Non-displaced lateral malleolus fracture, he said, showing me the image as if I could read it. She needs immobilization, elevation, and rest. 6 weeks minimum. 6 weeks is 2/3 of our scenario timeline. Bones don't negotiate with timelines, Graham. Carmen Mota was 45, dark-haired, quiet in a way that I initially mistook for passivity and later recognized as conservation. She'd been an ER nurse before Lily was born, then a school nurse at Lily's elementary school in Raleigh. She'd been on her feet for 3 days, walking on a fracture, keeping pace with her husband and daughter through terrain I hadn't asked about and didn't want to imagine. She sat on the examination table with her ankles splinted and elevated and told us, without being asked, what they'd seen. We left Raleigh on the 2nd day. The neighborhood was already gone. Not destroyed, just empty. Doors open, cars in driveways, nobody home. Like everyone had received an invitation we didn't get. Gil wanted to take I-40 west, but the highway was blocked at the Durham interchange. Not by traffic, by them. How many? Renata asked. I stopped counting at the overpass. Hundreds. They were on the highway, moving west in the travel lanes. Organized isn't the right word. Patterned, like a migration. Did they react to you? We were in the car, windows up, engine running. A few of them turned their heads as we passed on the frontage road. Turned, tracked us for a second, then went back to moving west. We weren't interesting enough, or we weren't close enough. I don't know what the threshold is. Gil added, we abandoned the car when the frontage road ended at a National Guard checkpoint that had been overrun. The vehicles were still there. Humvees, a troop transport. The soldiers were not. We went on foot from there. 40 miles in 3 days, staying off roads, sleeping in a tobacco barn the first night, and a church basement the second. The church basement, Carmen said and stopped. Gil put his hand on her shoulder. We heard them in the sanctuary above us. Gil continued. Not many, 4 or 5. They came in through the front doors and stayed for maybe 20 minutes, moving around, making that sound, the one that's not quite vocalization. Then they left. Carmen's ankle was already fractured by then. She'd stepped in a drainage ditch the first night. She walked 40 miles on it without telling me until I saw the swelling. I looked at Carmen. She met my eyes with an expression that was not defiant and not apologetic. It was the expression of a woman who had calculated that stopping would endanger her daughter and had made the calculation without consulting anyone. I need to ask a question, I said, and I need an honest answer. Gil's jaw tightened. Carmen's expression didn't change. Were any of you bitten, scratched, or exposed to bodily fluid from an infected person at any point during your transit? No, Gil said. Carmen? No. Lily? Lily was between us the entire time. She was not exposed. I believed them. I noted that believing them was a choice, not a verification, and that my vault's decontamination protocol had no diagnostic capability beyond visual inspection. I'd spent $68,000 on a door and nothing on a blood test. Another gap in the spreadsheet. That afternoon, while Carmen rested and Lily drew pictures at the common room table with markers Renata had found in a supply box, Warren asked to speak with me privately. We stood in the generator room, the diesel engine thrumming between us, and Warren said something that rearranged every assumption I'd carried into the vault. I need to tell you something before you find out another way. Gil's daughter, Lily, she was bitten 3 days ago, on the forearm. Gil treated the wound himself, and it's healing clean. She has no symptoms, no fever, no behavioral change, no sign of infection. She may be immune. She may be pre-symptomatic. I don't know. But I've examined her, and right now, she is a healthy 12-year-old girl. The generator hummed. The fluorescent lights buzzed. My vault, my $2.4 million vault, contained a bitten child, and the man who'd helped pay for it had known before he opened the door. I didn't confront Gil immediately. I want that noted, not because it reflects well on me, but because the delay reveals the specific way I failed. I went to my bunk and sat there for 40 minutes. I opened the binder to the section titled Exposure Protocol, a page I'd written in my home office on a Sunday afternoon 6 months earlier. With a glass of wine and the abstract confidence of a man managing hypothetical risk. The protocol was clear. Any individual with confirmed or suspected exposure to infected contact would be isolated in the decontamination corridor, pending a 72-hour observation period. If symptoms developed, the individual would be denied re-entry to the main vault. The protocol didn't specify what denied re-entry meant in practice because I'd written it as policy, not as a human decision. 72-hour isolation. For a 12-year-old girl, in a concrete corridor with a cot and a chemical toilet and no windows. I found Renata in the mechanical room, checking the water filtration output. I told her. Her hand stopped on the gauge. She didn't look at me for a long moment. Then, Marco is in the common room with her right now. They're drawing. I know. If she turns, Marco is the closest person to her. I know that too. What does your binder say? 72-hour isolation in the decontamination corridor. And what do you say? I didn't have an answer. The binder had an answer. Graham Kincaid, vault owner, chain of command author, had an answer. But the man standing in the mechanical room, whose hands were shaking for the second time since this started, did not. I say I need to talk to Gil. Gil was in the medical bay with Carmen. Warren was there too. Complicit, I understood now, in the concealment. I closed the door behind me. Warren told me about Lily's bite. Gil stood. He was taller than me by 4 inches, and in the enclosed space of the medical bay. That height became a physical fact I had to account for. Carmen pulled herself upright on the examination table, fracture and all, and the pain that crossed her face was less than the protective fury that replaced it. She was bitten on the forearm through a jacket sleeve, Gil said. The wound is superficial. I cleaned it, treated it with antibiotics from my kit, and bandaged it. That was 72 hours before we arrived here. She has shown 0 symptoms. The incubation period isn't established. I'm an anesthesiologist. I've read the same preliminary data you have. The observed incubation range in the Philadelphia cases was 6 to 18 hours. It's been over 5 days. Observed range in a limited sample. In the only sample available. She's not infected, Graham. She was bitten and she didn't turn. That's not a crisis. That's information. It's information you concealed from the group. Carmen spoke. We concealed it from you. From the man who would have locked our daughter in a concrete hallway. The protocol exists for everyone's safety. The protocol exists because you wrote it in your living room. You didn't write it for Lily. You wrote it for a scenario. My daughter is not a scenario. The room was very small. Warren stood with his arms crossed, positioned between me and the Modas. A physical arrangement that communicated his alliance without ambiguity. I was outnumbered in my own vault, overruled by the people I'd funded, outmaneuvered by a man whose $400,000 had purchased not just a share of the shelter, but the right to populate it with his own loyalties. I'm not going to isolate Lily, I said. The relief on Gil's face was immediate and visible. Carmen's expression didn't change. She'd already decided I wouldn't, or decided it didn't matter if I tried. But the group needs to know. Everyone in this vault has the right to assess the risk. If you tell them, Gil said, someone will demand isolation. Maybe not you, but someone. Then the group decides, not me, not you. I left the medical bay. In the common room, Lily and Marco were drawing a map of an imaginary island on the back of one of my printed agendas. Lily had given the island a name, written in careful block letters. Safe place. I sat at the common room table, and I didn't say anything for a long time. I told them at dinner. All 9 of us around the table. The table I'd selected from a catalog, rated for 12. Chosen because it was the right size for my approved list plus 2 guests. A table purchased for civilized briefings, now hosting something that would dismantle whatever civilization we'd brought underground. I told them factually. Lily had been bitten 5 days ago. The wound was healing. She had no symptoms. Warren had examined her. The observed incubation period in documented cases was 6 to 18 hours. She'd exceeded that window by a factor of 7. Dominic spoke first. 5 days, and Warren knew before they came in. I made a medical judgment, Warren said. You made a judgment about all of us, every person in this vault. You decided our risk tolerance for us. I decided that a healthy child wouldn't be locked in a corridor. That wasn't yours to decide alone. Diana, Warren's own wife, set down her fork. He's right, Warren. It wasn't. The tables shifted. Diana's break from Warren was the fracture line the room organized around. If Warren's own wife couldn't defend his unilateral decision, the consensus was clear. Concealment had been a betrayal of the group's trust, regardless of the outcome. Renata asked the operational question. What do we do now? She's been here for 36 hours. She's been in the common area, sharing meals, breathing the same recycled air. If she were going to turn, wouldn't there be some indication by now? We don't know that, Dominic said. We don't know anything about long incubation cases, because there may never have been long incubation cases until now. Or there have been, and they just never turned, I said. Or they turned slowly enough that nobody noticed until it was too late. Marco, who had been silent through every meeting since we arrived, spoke for the first time. Lily's fine. Everyone looked at him. 16 years old, headphones around his neck, voice breaking slightly on the consonants. I've been with her for 2 days. Drawing, talking, playing cards. She's not sick. She's not different. She's scared, and she's 12, and she's fine. Marco, Renata started. Mom, I know what you're going to say. I know the risk. I also know what I've seen. And what I've seen is a kid who draws maps of places that don't exist because the place she lived doesn't exist anymore. She's fine. The room absorbed this. A 16-year-old, making the argument that direct observation outweighed theoretical risk, with the moral authority of someone who'd actually been paying attention to the person everyone else was discussing as a variable. Dominic rubbed his face with both hands. I don't want to be the person who says this, but somebody has to, if she's immune, genuinely immune. That's not just relevant to this vault, that's relevant to everything. That's information that matters beyond these walls. What are you suggesting? Gil asked. His voice was careful, modulated. The voice of a man who'd been watching every face at the table and calculating trajectories. I'm suggesting that at some point, when it's safe, that information needs to reach people who can do something with it. Medical people, research people, if there's anyone left doing that kind of work. She's not a specimen, Carmen said. Nobody said specimen. I said information. There's a difference. Not to a 12-year-old, there isn't. The conversation fragmented after that. Warren withdrew to the medical bay. Diana stayed at the table, which communicated something. Gil took Carmen and Lily to their assigned bunk area. Dominic went to the supply room. Renata and Marco cleaned dishes in the kind of focused silence that families use to avoid saying what they're thinking. I sat alone at the table, with the remains of dinner and the binder open to a section I'd titled Group Cohesion Strategies. That included suggestions like rotating meal preparation duties and scheduling weekly recreational activities. The section was 6 pages long. I'd cited management literature. I'd included a bibliography. I closed the binder and pushed it to the center of the table. Not dramatically, not a gesture, just the physical act of putting distance between myself and a document that had stopped describing the world I was living in. Through the surface microphone, I heard them. Not the shuffling migration that had passed on day one. Something different. A sustained presence, multiple individuals, stationary, gathered above us in what sounded like a deliberate formation. They'd been absent for 2 days. Now they were back. More of them than before. Day 7. The surface microphone told a story I couldn't verify and couldn't ignore. They were above us, not passing through, not migrating, stationed. The audio feed registered continuous low-level movement, shuffling, the occasional impact of a body against the vault's surface infrastructure, and that sound Carmen had described. Not quite vocalization, a tonal hum that rose and fell without rhythm. I recorded it on the vault's digital system because the alternative was listening to it in real time and losing my ability to think about anything else. Renata ran the numbers. The surface microphone picks up sound in roughly a 60-foot radius. Based on the density of the audio, I'd estimate 15 to 20 individuals within that range. Consistent presence since last night. No pattern of arrival or departure. They're not coming and going. They're staying. Why here? Diana asked. She'd moved to the communications station permanently, monitoring frequencies with the focused attention of someone who needed a task more than she needed information. There are no surface signals. The generator exhaust is vented in through a buried pipe 100 yards from the entrance. The vault's thermal signature is negligible. Graham's contractor insulated for exactly this scenario. Sound, Dominic said. We're making sound. Talking, moving, the generator itself. This vault isn't soundproofed the way a recording studio is soundproofed. It's insulated for thermal and moisture. Sound conducts through concrete. I checked the contractor's specifications. Dominic was right. The vault's sound isolation rating was designed for privacy, preventing casual eavesdropping from the surface. It was not designed for acoustic invisibility. The diesel generator, which ran at 54 decibels inside the vault, transmitted a low-frequency vibration through the concrete floor slab into the surrounding earth. We'd been humming into the ground for 7 days. We can't turn off the generator, Warren said. It powers the air recycling system. Without it, CO2 accumulates. 7 adults and 2 adolescents in 2,200 square feet. We have maybe 8 hours of breathable air without active circulation. 12 hours, Renata corrected. I can switch the circulation to passive mode using the intake and exhaust vents. We lose the filtration, but we keep the airflow. It won't work long term. Particulates will build up, humidity will spike. But for short intervals, we can go silent. Silent intervals won't help if they've already located us, Gil said. They haven't located us specifically. They've located a sound source. If the sound stops, they may disperse. May. We're operating on May for everything. That's the reality. I made a decision, not a binder decision. A decision from the part of me that had once read lease agreements and found the irregular rhythms. We go silent for 6 hours. Renata switches to passive air. We kill the generator, kill the lights, and we monitor the surface mic. If they disperse, we know the sound was the attractant. If they don't, we know it's something else. The group looked at me. Not for permission. I'd lost that authority days ago. For assessment. Was this a good idea? Was I the right person to have proposed it? The two questions were separate, and I watched them evaluate both. It's a sound plan, Renata said. Phrasing that I recognized as deliberate. Endorsing the idea without endorsing the person. We went silent at noon. The generator died, the lights went out, and the vault sank into a darkness and quiet more complete than anything I'd experienced. Not just the absence of light, the absence of the mechanical pulse that had been the vault's heartbeat since we'd arrived. The air system's gentle push went still. The hum in the walls stopped. We sat in the common room, 9 people breathing in the dark, and listened through the surface mic with the volume on maximum. For 3 hours, the sounds above us continued, shuffling, shifting that tonal hum. I sat in the dark and felt the CO2 building in the air, a faint heaviness that might have been physiological or might have been psychological. Then, at the 3-hour mark, the sounds began to thin. Movement became sporadic. The hum faded. By hour 4, the surface microphone was registering only ambient noise. Wind, a distant bird, the creak of trees. By hour 5, silence. "They're gone," Diana said. We waited the full 6 hours. Renata restarted the generator. The lights came on. The air system engaged. The vault breathed again. "Sound," Dominic confirmed. "They tracked the sound." "Then we need a protocol for silent intervals," Renata said. "Scheduled generator shutdowns. Maybe 2 hours on, 2 hours off. We keep CO2 in the safe range while minimizing our acoustic signature." "That cuts our power availability in half," I said. "That keeps 20 infected from camping on our roof." I didn't argue. The protocol was sound. The irony was total. I'd spent $2.4 million building a shelter with a generator and air system and water filtration and LED lighting. And the thing that would keep us alive was turning all of it off. Day 12. The silent intervals were working. Renata's 2-on-2-off protocol kept the surface clear. We'd hear scattered movement during generator hours, then dispersal during the silent windows. A manageable rhythm, a sustainable pattern. I was beginning to think we'd found our equilibrium when Warren came to me in the generator room during a power cycle and said, "We have a medical problem." Diana's medication? Not Diana, Lily. My chest tightened. Symptoms? Not infection symptoms. She's exhibiting what I'd characterize as a paradoxical immune response. Low-grade fever, 99.8, fluctuating. Mild joint pain. A rash at the bite site that appeared yesterday and is spreading slowly up her forearm. Her cognitive function and behavior are completely normal. She's alert, oriented, conversational, but her body is doing something. Something like what? Something like fighting. An active immune engagement with whatever the pathogen is. If I had a lab, if I had blood work capability, I could tell you whether this is a successful immune response or a slow-motion failure. I don't have a lab. I have a stethoscope and a portable X-ray, and my 30 years of watching bodies do things I can't always explain. What's your clinical judgment? My clinical judgment is that she's not turning. My clinical judgment is also that I could be wrong, and that being wrong about this has consequences I can't reverse. I leaned against the generator housing. The diesel engine vibrated against my back, a mechanical heartbeat that I'd paid for, and that was now a liability. What do you want to do? I want to keep monitoring her. I want to be transparent with the group. And I want you to understand that if this goes badly, the decision to admit her was mine and Gil's, not yours. Warren, if it goes badly, nobody in this vault is going to care whose decision it was. He acknowledged that with a nod that contained more honesty than anything he'd said to me in 20 years of business partnership. I told the group, not at a meeting. I'd abandoned formal meetings after the binder incident. I told them individually, in conversations calibrated to each person's threshold for bad news. Renata heard it clinically and asked technical questions. Dominic heard it grimly and went to check the vault's internal doors, assessing which could be sealed as barriers. Diana heard it from Warren directly, and whatever passed between them stayed in the communications room. Marco heard it from Lily herself. I watched it happen from across the common room. Lily walked to where Marco was reading a paperback he'd found in the supply room. Someone at the Utah contractor had packed a box of books, a gesture of humanity amid the engineering. She sat beside him and held out her forearm, where the rash was visible now. A network of red lines spreading from the bandaged bite wound like a river delta mapped in inflammation. "It's getting bigger," she said. Marco looked at it, looked at her face. "Does it hurt?" "It itches, like a really bad mosquito bite. My abuela says if a bite itches, it means your body is winning." "Is that true?" "I don't know. But my abuela is right about most things." Lily pulled her sleeve down. "Marco, if I get sick, if I get different, I need you to tell someone, because I might not know. The people I saw in Raleigh, they didn't know. They didn't look like they knew anything at all. You're not going to get different. Promise me." "I promise." It was a promise between two young people in a concrete room, and it carried more weight than anything in my binder. I turned away because watching felt like intrusion, and because the emotion rising in my chest was not the calculated concern of a vault owner managing risk. It was grief for something I couldn't name, some lost certainty that money could build a wall high enough, a door heavy enough, a plan thorough enough to keep the unbearable from finding its way inside. Carmen appeared beside me. On crutches now, mobile, her fractured ankles splinted and wrapped. She didn't say anything. She just stood beside me and watched her daughter sit with a boy who'd promised to notice if she disappeared from herself. "Your son is a good kid," I said. "Marco isn't my son. Renata's son, I know. I know what you meant. And you're right. He is." Day 19. The vault's atmosphere had changed in ways my instruments couldn't measure and my binder hadn't anticipated. Not the air quality. Renata's cycling protocol maintained breathable conditions within acceptable parameters. The atmosphere, was social, emotional. The particular pressure that builds when 10 people share 2,200 square feet without daylight, without privacy, without the ability to walk away from a disagreement and come back to it after a drive or a night's sleep in a different room. Dominic and Warren had stopped speaking. The origin was a supply dispute. Dominic had reorganized the food inventory to prioritize caloric density, which meant moving Warren's bourbon to a bottom shelf behind canned beans. Warren had interpreted this as a territorial challenge. Dominic had interpreted Warren's objection as confirmation that the surgeon's priorities were compromised. Neither was entirely wrong. Both had stopped being able to see the other's face without the argument resuming in their expressions. Diana had withdrawn to the communications station with a completeness that felt clinical. She scanned frequencies for 12 hours a day, logging every fragment of transmission she intercepted. Her log had grown to 40 pages, handwritten, meticulous. Most entries were static. Some were partial military transmissions. Truncated, encrypted, indecipherable. 3 were civilian. A woman in Asheville reading a list of survivor names into a ham radio. A man in Danville repeating the Lord's Prayer on a loop. And a child's voice counting to 100 and starting over. Diana logged them all with equal precision and equal detachment. Renata kept the systems running. She'd become the vault's essential organ. Not its brain, not its heart, but its circulatory system. She maintained the generator, the water filtration, the air cycling protocol. She fixed a valve in the plumbing that I'd been told was maintenance-free. She recalibrated the CO2 sensor when its readings started drifting. The vault ran because Renata made it run. And the vault ran despite me, not because of me. And I had to sit with that every day. Gil spent his hours with Lily. monitoring her temperature, examining the rash, talking to her in the steady, careful tone of a father who was also conducting a medical evaluation and refusing to let either role contaminate the other. The rash had stopped spreading on day 15, stabilized at a boundary line just above her elbow. Her fever had broken on day 16. Warren's assessment delivered privately to me. Her immune system is winning. I don't understand the mechanism, but the clinical trajectory is resolution, not progression. You're sure? I'm less unsure than I was last week. In medicine, that's what sure looks like. Lily herself was the least concerned person in the vault. She'd adopted a daily routine, drawing in the morning, reading in the afternoon, playing cards with Marco in the evening. She asked questions constantly. How does the water filter work? Why does the generator make that sound? What are the numbers on the old documents in the supply room? She was metabolizing the vault the way children metabolize any environment, not as a crisis space, but as a world, complete and explorable. On the evening of day 19, during a generator on cycle, Diana intercepted a transmission that changed the math. I have a clear signal, she said, her voice carrying a charge it hadn't held in days. Military, unencrypted. Repeating. We gathered at the communications station. Diana amplified the signal through the vault's speaker system, and a male voice filled the concrete room. Calm, professional. Reading from a script. This is United States Army Civil Affairs, broadcasting from Forward Operating Base Cardinal, located in Wythe County, Virginia. We are accepting civilian survivors at the following coordinates. Approach from the south via Route 21. Northern and eastern approaches are compromised. Medical facilities, food, water, and shelter are available. Repeat, we are accepting civilian survivors. This message will repeat every 30 minutes on this frequency. If you are receiving this message, you are not alone. The last 4 words hung in the recycled air. You are not alone. A sentence engineered for exactly this moment, for exactly these people, sitting in exactly this kind of hole. Wythe County, Renata said, already calculating. That's maybe 100 miles from here. Mountainous terrain, 2 days on foot minimum, 3 with Carmen's ankle. I can walk, Carmen said from the back of the group. You can't walk 100 miles on a fractured ankle. Watch me. We're not going anywhere, I said, and the room's attention converged on me. This vault is provisioned for 90 days. We're on day 19. We have months of safety left. That broadcast could be a week old, a month old. FOB Cardinal could be overrun by the time we get there. We have concrete walls and steel doors and clean water. Out there is 100 miles of open terrain filled with infected who track sound. In here, Dominic said quietly, is a concrete box where 2 people won't speak to each other. The air goes off every 2 hours, and a 12-year-old girl is fighting a pathogen we don't understand. I built a lot of things in my life, Graham. I've lived in a lot of small spaces. This one is shrinking. The vote wasn't in the binder. I'd never written a section on whether to abandon the vault because the vault was the plan. The vault was the entire point. $2.4 million of point. Renata proposed the structure. Each person states their position. Group decides by majority. Dissent respected, but not binding. Simple, democratic. Everything my chain of command model was not. Warren voted to stay. The medical bay was his domain. His supplies were here, and the risk of moving Carmen across mountainous terrain was, in his assessment, unacceptable. Diana voted to go. She'd been listening to the silence between broadcasts for 19 days. and the silence was eating her in a way the concrete walls amplified. Dominic voted to go. Staying is dying slow. I've done slow. I don't recommend it. Renata voted to go with a condition. We bring the portable shortwave. We maintain contact with the broadcast. If FOB Cardinal goes silent before we arrive, we find a secondary position. Gil voted to go. Carmen voted to go. Both of them looked at Lily when they voted, and the direction of their gaze was the direction of their reasoning. Marco voted to go. He said it simply, without argument, and looked at Lily after he said it, not before. Lily wasn't given a formal vote, but she said, "I want to go where there are doctors, real doctors with real labs, because I want to know what happened to me, and so does everyone else, even if they won't say it." Warren stared at his hands for a long time. Then, "I change my vote. Go. If there's a functioning medical facility, Lily needs it more than she needs my examination table. 8 votes to go. 0 to stay." I hadn't voted yet. They looked at me. I sat in the chair at the head of the table, the position I'd assigned myself on day 1, the position that had become meaningless as the days accumulated and my authority dissolved into the concrete. I looked at the room. My room. The room I'd designed, funded, built, stocked, and organized. The room where I'd imagined leading a group of carefully selected individuals through a crisis with the competence and control that my career had always provided. "I vote to go," I said. "But I want to say something first." The room waited. This vault is the most expensive thing I've ever built. It's also the most useless thing I've ever built. Not because the systems failed. The systems are perfect. The contractor delivered exactly what I paid for. Every wall, every door, every filter and gauge and generator component is performing to specification. The vault works. What doesn't work is the idea that I could buy safety and distribute it according to a spreadsheet. What doesn't work is the assumption that spending $2.4 million made me qualified to decide who lives and how. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the laminated access card, the master code for the vault's entry system. I'd been carrying it since day 1, not because I needed it. Renata had her own copy, but because holding it felt like holding authority. I put it on the table. "Renata, this should be yours. You've kept this place running since the minute we arrived. If anyone ever comes back here, if this vault ever serves another group, the person who opens the door should be the person who kept the lights on." Renata looked at the card, picked it up, put it in her pocket without ceremony. "We leave at first light," she said. "During a silent interval, Dominic and I will plan the route. Graham, I need you on supply calculation. How much food and water can 9 people carry for a 3-day march?" 10 people, Gil said. 9, I corrected. Lily doesn't carry a pack. The adults distribute her share. Gil looked at me. Carmen looked at me. For the first time since they'd arrived, their expressions contained something other than caution. I spent the night doing what I'd always done best. I calculated. Weight per person, caloric requirements per day per individual, adjusted for exertion level and terrain, water purification capacity of the portable system, first aid supplies ranked by probability of need. I built a logistics plan on the back of my useless agenda pages, and for the first time in 19 days, the numbers on the page corresponded to something real. Not a shelter, a movement. Not a vault, a direction. We opened the vault door on day 20 at 5:47 a.m. during a silent interval into a world I didn't recognize. Not because it had changed dramatically. The trees were the same loblolly pines. The gravel drive was the same gravel drive. The sky was the same October sky, shifting toward November. What I didn't recognize was the quality of the air. After 20 days of filtered, recycled, mechanically circulated atmosphere, the surface air hit my lungs like cold water. Rich, complex, carrying the smell of decomposing leaves and distant rain and something faintly animal. I stood in the doorway and breathed it, and felt my chest expand in a way the vault had never permitted. The surface was clear. No infected visible on the drive, in the tree line, or on the road below. The silent interval had done its work. Without the generator's vibration, we'd become invisible again. Our vehicles were where we'd hidden them, covered in 3 weeks of fallen leaves. We wouldn't be using them. Engines made sound, and sound was now the enemy. Renata led. She'd planned the route the night before on my topographic maps. South through the Piedmont forest for 8 miles to a state highway crossing, then southwest on secondary roads and trails toward the Blue Ridge escarpment, then through the mountains to Wythe County. The terrain dictated the pace. Wooded hills, creek crossings, occasional open fields that we'd cross quickly and in silence. 9 people. 4 packs distributed among 6 adults with Dominic and Tomas. No, not Tomas. There was no Tomas here, with Dominic and Gil carrying the heaviest loads. Carmen on crutches, slower but mobile, her jaw set against pain she'd stopped acknowledging. Warren beside her, providing a steadying hand on rough terrain. A penance performed in physical proximity. Marco and Lily in the middle of the group, where they were shielded by adults on all sides. I carried the supply pack. 42 pounds of food, water purification, first aid, and the portable shortwave. The weight was mine by choice. Not because I was the strongest carrier, but because carrying weight was the contribution I could still make. The vault was behind me, sealed, dark, empty. I'd left the door unlocked. Someone might need it. The first 3 miles were forest. Dense, quiet, the canopy filtering the early light into green-gold columns. We moved in single file on a game trail Renata had identified from the topographic contours. Conversation was prohibited, Renata's rule, enforced by a hand signal she'd taught the group that morning. We communicated in gestures. Stop, move, look left, look right, stay low. Lily was silent with a discipline that shouldn't have been required of a 12-year-old. She walked beside Marco, matching his pace, her eyes moving constantly, scanning the trees, the trail, the spaces between things. She'd seen more than any child should see, and her watchfulness was the visible cost. At mile 4, we hit the first road. A 2-lane county highway, cracked asphalt, no traffic. We waited at the tree line for 10 minutes, watching and listening. Nothing moved. Renata signaled the crossing, and we went in pairs. Renata and Marco first, then Gil and Carmen, then Warren and Diana, then Lily and Dominic, then me, alone, last, watching behind us. On the far side, the terrain changed. The Piedmont's gentle rolls steepened into the foothills. The forest transitioned from pine to mixed hardwood. Oak, hickory, poplar, the branches bare now, the understory visible for 100 yards in every direction. Less cover, more sight lines. A trade-off I felt in my spine. At mile 6, Dominic raised a fist. Everyone stopped. Ahead, where the trail crossed a shallow creek, a figure stood in the water. Knee-deep, facing upstream, motionless. A woman in a hospital gown, soaked, her hair hanging in wet ropes. She wasn't moving. She wasn't orienting. She was standing in the creek like a piece of the landscape. And the water parted around her shins and kept going. Single, Renata whispered. Isolated. No others visible. "She's between us and the crossing," Dominic whispered back. "We go around. 50 meters upstream. Stay in the trees." We detoured through dense undergrowth, moving with agonizing slowness to avoid the snap of branches or the rustle of leaves. Carmen's crutches were a liability. Renata had wrapped the tips in cloth, but each placement on the forest floor was a calculated risk. Gil stayed beside Carmen, guiding each step, choosing her footfalls with the precision of a man diffusing ordnance. We crossed the creek upstream, ankle-deep in cold water that numbed my feet instantly. Lily crossed on Gil's back, her arms around his neck, silent. On the far bank, I looked back. The woman in the hospital gown hadn't moved. The water still parted around her. She remained in the creek like an interrupted thought, and something about her stillness was worse than pursuit. We kept moving. By nightfall, we covered 11 miles, and every one of them had extracted something from the group that rest alone wouldn't replenish. Carmen's ankle was swelling despite the splint. Warren examined it by flashlight in the hollowed-out foundation of a collapsed barn where we'd stopped for the night. No roof, but the stone walls provided windbreak and concealment. He rewrapped it without comment, but I saw the angle of his mouth, and the angle said things the surgeon wouldn't. "Can she do this for 2 more days?" I asked him, quietly, while the Carmen settled against the wall with her leg elevated on a pack. "She can do it for as long as she decides to do it. The ankle isn't the limiting factor. The pain is, and Carmen's relationship with pain is one I wouldn't bet against." Dinner was cold rations. No fire, no heat source, nothing that produced light or sound beyond whispered conversation. We ate canned protein and crackers and drank filtered creek water and called it a meal. Lily ate without complaint. Marco ate sitting beside her, their shoulders touching, a proximity that had become habitual and that neither of them acknowledged. I took first watch, sat on the barn's foundation wall with the shortwave radio and scanned for the FOB Cardinal broadcast. Found it at 9 p.m. The same message, same voice, same frequency, unencrypted, repeating. The coordinates hadn't changed. The approach instructions hadn't changed. The last 4 words hadn't changed. "You are not alone." Diana appeared beside me. She'd been logging broadcasts for 19 days in the vault, and old habits followed her to the surface. "Still transmitting," she said. "Still transmitting." That's either very good or very bad. A static repeating message could mean they're stable, or it could mean the message is automated and nobody's there to update it. "Which do you think?" "I think I've spent 3 weeks listening to the world go quiet, and this is one of the few voices left. I want it to be real badly enough that I don't trust my judgment." That's the most honest thing anyone in this group has said. Diana almost smiled. "Graham, I want to tell you something. Warren and I have been married for 23 years. In 23 years, he has never once admitted an error of judgment. Not to me, not to a patient, not to a colleague. He compensates, he adjusts, he maneuvers. But he doesn't say, 'I was wrong.' What he did with Lily, concealing the bite, that was the Warren I know, protecting his decision by hiding it. You disagreed with him publicly. I disagreed with him because he was wrong, and because this group needed to see that loyalty to a person doesn't require loyalty to their worst impulse. Warren is a good doctor. He is not always a good man. I stay married to him because the good doctor is the version that matters more often than it doesn't." She went to bed after that. I sat on the wall with the radio and the dark, and the particular loneliness of being the person who'd built the most expensive room any of them had ever entered, and who was now sitting on a ruined barn wall watching the stars with nothing left to own. At 2 a.m., Dominic relieved me. I climbed down and found a space against the barn wall between supply packs and closed my eyes. Sleep came in fragments. In one fragment, I dreamed about the vault, not as I'd built it, but as it would be in a year. Empty, the generator out of fuel, the lights dead, the water stagnant in the pipes. My binder on the table, its pages curling in the humidity. A $68,000 door standing open because I'd left it that way, inviting anyone and meaning nothing. I woke before dawn with the dream still vivid and the peculiar clarity that sometimes follows insufficient rest. The dream wasn't sad. The vault empty, the door open, the binder decomposing. That was right. That was what vaults were for. Not to be lived in forever. To be left. Renata was already awake, checking the route on the map by penlight. 18 miles to the mountain approach. 2 valleys to cross. Both have roads, which means both may have infected presence. I want to cross the first one before midday, when visibility is high and we can see the full span. And the second? The second one is the New River. Wide, open, bridged. The bridge is the choke point. If there's anywhere we'll encounter concentrated numbers, it's there. Is there another crossing? Not within 15 miles in either direction. The bridge or nothing. Then we take the bridge. Then we'd better be the quietest 9 people in Virginia. We reached the New River Bridge at 4 p.m. on day 21. The valley opened below us, like a wound in the mountains, wide, flat-bottomed. The river glinting silver in the low autumn sun. The bridge was a 2-lane concrete span, maybe 300 yards long, with rusted guardrails and a surface cracked from decades of freeze-thaw cycles. On the far side, the road climbed into the mountains toward Wythe County, toward FOB Cardinal, toward the broadcast that Diana still believed was real, and that I was staking 9 lives on. Between us and the bridge, on the valley floor, they moved. Not dozens, hundreds. A distributed field of figures covering the floodplain on both sides of the river, moving in that patterned non-pattern I'd first heard described in Carmen's account of the Raleigh Highway. They were spread across an area of maybe half a square mile, spaced evenly, drifting in slow currents that had no obvious destination. Some stood still, some walked in wide loops. The tonal hum was audible, even from the ridge. A collective sound, low and penetrating, that I felt in my teeth. The bridge is clear, Renata said, looking through binoculars. They're on the floodplain, not the road. The bridge approach is elevated. It sits 15 feet above the plain on a concrete abutment. If we stay on the bridge deck, we're above them. If they don't react to us, what's the distance from the nearest ones to the bridge? 50 meters on the near side, maybe 30 on the far side where the road meets the valley floor. 30 meters, 100 feet, close enough to see their faces, if they still had expressions that qualified as faces. Warren spoke. This isn't a decision. This is the calculation of acceptable loss. If we turn back, we have 3 days of food and no destination. If we cross, we have a chance. Carmen? Carmen looked at the valley, at the bridge, at the hundreds of figures below it. Then she looked at Lily. Lily first, she said. With Gil, then Marco with Renata, then the rest. Fastest crossers first. If it goes wrong, the ones already across keep going. They don't come back. Carmen, Gil started. The ones already across keep going. That's not a suggestion. I understood what she was doing. She was the slowest. Fractured ankle, crutches. She was placing herself last in the crossing order because she was the most likely to attract attention. And she was doing it with the clinical precision of a woman who'd spent a career triaging emergency rooms. She was triaging herself. "I'll cross with Carmen," I said. Everyone looked at me. I'm the slowest after her. Bad knees, 20 extra pounds. If something goes wrong on the bridge, the person next to Carmen should be the one the group can most afford to lose. "Graham," Renata started. "The group can most afford to lose the man who built the vault they left behind. That's not self-pity. That's triage." Carmen met my eyes. The nurse assessed the patient. Whatever she saw, she accepted. The crossing took 11 minutes. Gil went first with Lily on his back, moving fast, his footsteps deliberate and controlled on the cracked concrete. Below them, on the floodplain, two of the figures turned their heads, tracked the movement, then turned away. Gil reached the far side and kept going, not stopping, carrying Lily up the road until they were 100 meters past the bridge. Renata and Marco went next. Same result. Minor orientation from the nearest figures, no sustained attention. The speed helped. The elevation helped. The bridge was a different plane, a different surface, and the infected seemed to process it as separate from the floodplain. Warren and Diana. Then Dominic, alone, walking fast with his head down. Carmen and me, last. She was faster on crutches than I expected. The rhythm was practiced. Swing, plant, step, swing, plant, step. And she covered ground with an efficiency that made me the slower one. I stayed beside her, matching her pace, watching the floodplain below us. The figures were closer on this side. I could see details I didn't want to see. Clothing, body shapes, the particularity of individuals who had been people before they became this. At the midpoint of the bridge, Carmen's crutch caught a crack in the concrete. She stumbled. The crutch rang against the guardrail. A sharp metallic clang that cut through the ambient hum and echoed off the valley walls. Below us, every figure on the floodplain stopped moving. Simultaneously, as if the sound had been a switch. Then they turned. Dozens of them, all at once, facing the bridge. Carmen regained her footing. "Go," she said. We went, not running. Carmen couldn't run, but moving at the maximum speed her crutches allowed, which was a fast hobble that jarred her ankle with every plant, and which she performed without a sound. The far end of the bridge grew closer at a rate that felt geological. Behind us, on the floodplain, movement. Not toward us, toward the bridge abutment. They were converging on the structure itself, drawn by the sound, following the acoustic trace. If they reached the bridge deck before we reached the road, the 300 yards between us and them would close to zero. We hit the far abutment. The road climbed. Carmen threw one crutch forward and I grabbed her arm and pulled, and Dominic appeared from the tree line and took her other side, and we went up that road with the grace of a collapsing building and the speed of people who understood that the sound behind us. The sound of feet on concrete, dozens of feet, climbing the bridge approach, was a countdown. We made the tree line. Gil was there with Lily, Renata with Marco, Warren with Diana. All of them, waiting, not having gone ahead, not having followed Carmen's instruction to keep going if it went wrong. "I told you not to wait," Carmen said, breathing hard. "We heard you," Renata said. "We disagreed." We reached FOB Cardinal at noon on day 22. The base was real. The broadcast was live. The voice on the radio belonged to a sergeant named Dawes, who met us at the southern checkpoint and counted us twice. As if 9 survivors arriving on foot from the wrong direction was a math problem he needed to verify. They had doctors. They had labs. Within 6 hours, Lily was being examined by an immunologist who'd arrived from what remained of Johns Hopkins. and the expression on her face when she reviewed the blood work was the expression of someone finding something she'd theorized but never confirmed. I stood outside the medical tent and watched the sun set behind the mountains and felt the particular emptiness of a man who has spent everything he has and is standing in the space where the money used to be. Carmen found me there, still on crutches, still moving. "You carried the heaviest pack," she said. It was just food. It was never just food. She was right. But I didn't have language for what it actually was. The weight of a man who'd spent $2.4 million learning that the most expensive thing he'd ever built wasn't worth the aluminum crutch a nurse used to cross a bridge. Lily was immune. The labs confirmed it 2 days later. Her blood carried antibodies that no one had seen before. She was 12 years old, and she held in her veins information that might outlast every vault ever built. I never went back for the door.